coming?
No, ma'am, he won't be able to make it.
That was on the anniversary today.
Okay, at 7 o'clock, I will call the planning commission meeting for February 4th, 2020 to order. Would you call the roll, please?
Miss Janie Rhodes. Here. Mr. Stephen Greenwood. Mr. John Breeden. Mr. Stephen Greenwood. And Chairman Don Wagner.
Here.
Miss Vaughn.
You missed one.
Oh, sorry, Miss Bonnie Hyde.
Here.
Okay, do I hear a motion to review and adopt, or review and adopt the meeting agenda?
So moved.
All in favor, say aye. Approved. All right, the review and approval, there you go. All right, let's get seated. Next item is the review and approval of the minutes, the October 1st, 2019 meeting minutes have not been approved, so I will entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
I do have some comments. Do we make a motion to approve first?
Let's do the comments first.
On page 5,
Mhm.
on October 1st, talks about the CUP 0319 sweet solar as amended. I don't think at the October meeting that the motion was to recommend approval. I think the motion was made to table. Am I correct?
No, the October meeting, the motion was made, no, it's a later meeting that we tabled.
Right, we actually voted on October 1st.
We voted on October 1st.
So we
Yes.
voted on October 1st, wouldn't that have, then it says recommend approval. So we recommended approval in October, and then we didn't consider it again?
Not until December.
This was when the mistake happened with the mailing stuff. So you guys did recommend it.
We recommended approval.
Yes.
Okay.
However,
But then it
there
had
is
to come
also
back.
a note that says Mr. Breeden voted against it that night, and he did not. I was the only one that voted against it.
So
Where is
you will change
October
that
1st.
to aye for Mr. Green.
Okay. So,
And this is the meeting that you actually recommended decommission
yeah,
be added to number 4, number 3, 4, 5, and 7.
so if
And
we
you
recommended,
added number 12 for the hours.
so if we recommended approval at that time, why did we later, how did it not go in front of the Board of Supervisors? When did we table it?
Well,
It did go to the Board of Supervisors in
On the commission,
October,
okay.
which then did not have the landowner that got notified, and then so it came back to us on December 1st, in which we tabled
Gotcha.
it.
I think I'm getting confused with all the dates, so the tabling came later.
Yeah, but you did make a few of the recommendations for 3, 4, 5, and 7 to have decommission added to those conditions.
Right.
And it reads, I wanted to bring this up as well, for what Mr. Etter and staff proposed did not include decommission of site. Those were the recommendations that you added after the public hearing. So when it says as amended, I wanted to make sure that the as amended stated that 3, 4, 5, and 7 decommission of site was included, and that you had number 12 added for the hours to be restricted. And then for Mr. Breeden's vote to be changed to aye instead. And those were my comments for what we needed to make updates before. Oh, and you also added for number 7, the word damaged
Yes.
for the plant, for the vegetation.
Yes.
Good catch.
I would also like to point out two other things, before we make a motion. On agenda item number 4 on page 2, we normally put that we make a motion to, approve the minutes. So, if I recall correctly, it was all ayes that night for the approval of the meeting minutes. So I wanted to make sure that that got included.
I'm sorry, where are you at?
Agenda item number 4 on the October 1st minutes, page number 2.
We just need to add the vote was unanimous.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, okay.
And then I would also like to add, on page 3, prior to the public hearing, that we make a note that I would like Mr. Berry's PowerPoint presentation to be included as part of the minutes that get recorded for the October 1st meeting. I don't know whether the rest of the planning commission,
Have we got those comments?
do you have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation from Mr. Berry?
If I don't, I will have one, but yes, I believe I have all of his presentations. I should have, and if I don't, I can get them, but I'm 90% sure that we have all of the ones that we did.
I think that's a good recommendation to preserve. It is a record.
Okay, any other comments? If not, then I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of October 1st, 2019.
I'll make that motion with the updates that we've requested.
Okay. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Ms. Cole, would you call the roll on that, please?
Miss Janie Rose,
Aye.
Mr. Stephen Greenwood,
Abstain.
Miss Bonnie Heist,
Aye.
and Chairman Donlin.
Aye. All right, the next item on the agenda is the public comment period. Speakers have 3 minutes to speak on any item on the agenda tonight, or the other item, anyone that wishes to speak.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
there's a couple other sets of minutes that I think we
Sorry,
That's okay.
let me back up. We'll go ahead, we have minutes also for December 12th, 2019, and December 7th, 2020, and I'll go ahead and ask for a motion to approve those two sets of minutes together. Do I hear a motion to approve?
Well, was not both present and absent from the meeting. I'm trying to remember, I looked at my calendar, whether I was actually at that meeting. But also, is there someone?
I believe you were absent on the 12th.
I do too.
Sure.
So so you're not on
I'm
there. So
sorry.
you were present
I was present, yes.
and I was absent.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. So take me off present, put Chairman Wagner, and then keep me on absent.
Okay.
Thank you.
And, all right, any other comments?
Yeah, not for the December minutes, but for the January minutes. I wanted to make note, under agenda item number 6, old business, page 2 of the January 7th minutes, where we recommended approval, I wanted to make sure that we noted that we were recommending the approval with the conditions that were presented. And I believe, I can't remember right now whether there were 18 or 19 conditions at that point that we approved, but I wanted that figure to be included as part of those minutes.
What line under A?
It's under,
That's,
yeah, under A, the last paragraph on page 2. And it actually should say Mrs. Rhodes made a motion to recommend approval. And it also needs to say who seconded it, and I believe that was Mr. Greenwood that night. If you recall, Mr. Greenwood, if that was you.
You just want to put all the what it was 18 that night, or was, I know we restricted.
It was, yeah, it was 18 then, yes.
So Ms. Rhodes made a motion to recommend approval of the Sweet Solar to the Board of Supervisors with amendments as discussed,
Yeah, with the conditions as discussed.
with the conditions as discussed.
It says with all conditions, and it does, she just wants the number of conditions.
Yeah, because we've changed back and forth so many times, I kind of wanted to
It's
include.
18 conditions, and instead of with all. the
That's why I
conditions.
said as, oh, okay, well, as amended pursuant to the discussion, but however you think the wording is clearest.
I just kind of had wanted the number be included because between the meetings, we've changed so many
Oh,
times.
yeah.
With the 18 conditions as discussed. That-
Yeah,
Okay.
and that was the only other,
Any other comments on?
Maybe change it to Mrs. Rhodes instead of Mr. Rhodes.
I made that.
I didn't notice that until I was getting ready to leave it out now.
Thanks, Ron. Yes, we-
Wrong committee.
Yeah, second.
Okay, any other comments or additions? If not,
We'll just make a note to change the
that's
chairman.
corrected.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a note to change the chairman signature to Mr. Wagner.
For January 7th, Mr. Frieden decided that.
But did he preside? Okay.
Yes.
No, we'll leave it.
I'll make a motion to approve the December 12th, 2019 and January 7th, 2020 minutes as amended.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor? Ms. Cole, would you call the roll on that, please?
Ms. Rhodes,
Aye.
Mr. Greenwood,
Aye.
Ms. Hyde,
Aye.
and Chairman Wagner.
Aye. Next item, the public comment period again. Anyone wishing to speak, we have 3 minutes to speak, unless you're a member of the group. So if anyone wishes to speak, please come forward. Hearing no one, we will move on. Close the public comment period and move to the next item. Next item is, let's see, next item is public hearings. We have none. Item 7 is old business. Next steps for ordinance revision, Mr. Hutter.
Well, at this point, following this meeting, we'll go ahead and hopefully get through the rest of the draft ordinance. And at which point, we will take it out to the community. We're working on a work group, putting together a work group with stakeholders to get those comments back. And then we'll move down that that system, and at some point we'll have a work session where we can take the comments of the work group, get the planning commission together, and then we'll go through and come up with whatever compromise language or whatever we need to do at that point. Once that's accomplished, the Historical Architectural Review Board does have they're working on their portion of it as well now, but they were given that last week.
Might I make one suggestion?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Greenwood is here and Ms. Destiner is here. What about before we go out to the work groups, go to a work session with the board and the EDA to just give them an overview of the major changes that they made before we go out to our work groups and community meetings?
I'd be inclined at this point, before we get involved with the Board of Supervisors, because I have a feeling from the work group that there'll be other major changes and, potentially things that we haven't identified. At which point I'd like to get that and then go to the board with the joint, do that as a joint work
Yeah, my
session.
thoughts were to give the board and the EDA an update on where we stand at this point in time, rather than going through all of this and waiting until April or May to go to the supervisor. Just to give them, not to offer it up to the board or the EDA to make a lot of changes, but rather give them an overview of what we're doing.
I'll talk to Ms. Tessanarian and see if at some point she'll throw me on
Making
it.
comments now, that would be pretty good as well.
And I will let you know that one of the members for the work group is going to be a representative of the BZA. I wanted them involved in
Of the EDA?
the EDA.
I thought you said BZA.
No, EDA.
Okay.
So, but, yeah, well, we'll take some time and look at that and see the best way to approach it.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'd also like to ask the question that, do we want to have one of the planning commissioners involved in that breakout of a work group, just so that member can have input and knowledge of what happens during that time frame?
The work group, just because of transparency laws and my discussions with the county attorney, I can't have members from the planning commission or the board of supervisors don't need to be, shouldn't be a part of that work group, so they can work independently. And then that's why I want to have a work session with the planning commission, because that's the government part. This is a private work group that doesn't have association, so they can work independently that way. And then once they come up with theirs, then we sit down with a joint session during a work session with the planning commission. And that's the public part of it.
You're talking about having a work group, then go to the board and the EDA before we go to public comment here, public meetings.
Public hearings, yes.
Public,
So the work
not
of the
public
work,
hearings, but public meetings.
right, and see, if I have planning commissions or board of supervisors members part of that work group, then that throws it into a government situation, if you will, where we have to advertise and all this stuff, and that defeats the purpose of the work group.
Can you, if I may, can you describe for me what the work group will be doing?
They're doing exactly what we've been doing for 6 months, except hopefully a lot more abbreviated. I want to take it out to the stakeholders and the community so that they can give their input, their suggestions on how the county's ordinances should read. And this is pretty much the first step towards getting it out to the general public. But this work group is going to be made up of stakeholders, large property owners, developers, the people who have a very vested interest in how our ordinances for the county goes forward. So I want them to take a look, identify the areas that, of their main concerns, make recommendations, and then I'd like to bring them together with the planning commission to go over any areas that, you know, differ. And I think that way we can get a consensus of the community in general, and then at which point we go public, basically.
And the timing of the work group would be when, I'm sorry if you, I'm just trying to get my arms
Oh, no,
around the process, so,
I want to see where we get tonight, so
Okay.
that the whole, once we get through this tonight, and we have a document that the planning commission's happy with, the good structure, the framework, we've, you know, dotted the i's and crossed the t's, then, next week, if that's, if we get through all of this and we're comfortable with it, is when I will send out the invitations to the members of the work group. And then I'll, the invitation will be, hey, let's have a meeting, and then that'll be the kickoff meeting for the work, the community work group.
I don't totally agree with your approach, because we are representatives of the stakeholders. So I'm sitting up here.
well, my concern is that we've been looking at all of this somewhat within a vacuum, and not having the benefit of a representative of the EDA or other individuals is necessary to speak to us as part of this comprehensive document that hopefully will stand the test of time. I have concerns that we're not making, that we don't have all the information that will be helpful to us in terms of drafting this. I mean, we've just been working together without other EDA and,
Well, yeah, and basically, this is the working draft, that we've taken
Right,
the
I
time to get
understand.
something that we can take to people. This isn't a final, this isn't anybody voting on anything, because like you said, we don't have enough information. You know, we've been working in a vacuum. The work group is to bring in the other stakeholders, get their perspective. Once we have that, then we go to, I know the BZA wants involvement, Economic Development Authority, of course, Board of Supervisors. Then we still haven't gotten all those inputs, so I'm doing step by step is the approach. The Planning Commission has come up with a framework, a really good ordinance. Now let's fill in the gaps, expand where we need to, contract where we need to, and the approach is the work group with the stakeholders, BZA boards, et cetera, and then after we all have a couple work sessions and we have consensus, then that's what we take for public hearings, before the Planning Commission and before the Board of Supervisors.
It's not that I don't agree with having the developers involved. I think they should be involved somewhat, but I almost think they should be involved as part of the other stakeholders. I don't think I want to see a document coming here from the developers sort of demanding changes that we've made with best intentions for this county.
Oh, I understand, I do understand your concern. I've just, looking at the process and the fact that this impacts the entire community, I believe the developers and landowners need a voice.
I think the developers and landowners absolutely need a voice as well, but in terms of the initial drafting of the document, I would like our colleagues who are serving as representatives on the EDA, et cetera, to be able to participate or at least have some insight so that we're not drafting in a vacuum.
Well, what I would suggest for that, is we can go, once we get through this draft, there is no problem at all of delivering this draft to the BZA, to Economic Development Authority, to the Board of Supervisors. There's no prohibition or any reason that I would not include or see to not include the other boards.
I'm not trying to be hard to get along with and negative on this, but I don't look at the developers as being stakeholders so much. I look at them as being clients. And I have a little bit of think we have to leave a statement. The public is looking to us to come out with what's best for the county. And I think when we start giving in to the development side, then I can see all kinds of things in here that we recommend.
Well, here's my thing, is that's no different than saying the Walmart, let's have the Walmart come in here and give their presentation on why. It's no different. People who buy land and want a development absolutely have a say. What I'm speaking to are the people that are looking at the long-term plan of the county, the EDA and other stakeholders to be able to, whether they're looking at it or actually speaking to us as a group and saying, we've reviewed it and these are our preliminary recommendations, then you will enroll the product and absolutely anybody can have a say in terms of the work group.
And that's, there's nothing that comes out, the Board of Supervisors makes the final decision
Yep.
anyway. And I just believe it's important that we get, and I consider them the citizens that own the land, that are developing the land, that they have as big a stake as anybody else in the prosperity of the county and how the county evolves over the next 50 years.
I guess I have a concern that we as the county, we as the public, are all on board with it before we go to the development community. And you said what you're going to have in those work groups is the developers, landowners, farmers,
Yes.
what else?
Right now, I'm looking at representatives from the farming community, large landowners. I'm looking at a couple of developers who own significant portions of the commercial real estate that we want. At least one real estate agent who is very familiar, with the county. One member of the Economic Development Authority is the, and that pretty much rounds out the group. I want a small, very influential, knowledgeable group of people who, like I said, they have a vested interest in their county as well.
I have a vested interest, but I don't want to see their interest be above the interest of the citizens of the county.
Well, anything that comes out of this work group, the first people who will see it will be the planning commission.
Stephen, would that be coming?
I just was saying that it'll come to us first. If
Yes.
we want to put any of it in there, we don't have to. Nothing.
Right.
He's not putting
Here's
anything.
my thing is,
From the
I
developers.
would like the opportunity to speak with the members of the EDA and other people within the county purview to say, before we release it to the work group, and the work group's gonna have lots of comments, and they're entitled to have comments, to be able to round out our product. That's what I would like to see.
And if I may, I feel like a lot of this has been provided to the planning commission, and yes, we've had months that we've been trying to go through this. I feel like we've been wordsmithing some things, but I think that there's some content that we actually need to have some hard discussions on what we need to see within this planning commission before we take this document off to anyone. And that was gonna be part of my recommendations of what we would discuss tonight with the Berkeley group, because I would like some of their input on some things that are harder topics, just like with what is going on as far as solar is concerned and the citizens' concerns that have come back. I would like some input and feedback on if we were to want to change something in our ordinances, what that would look like, and whether we can start putting those types of things together. In the past, we have also had things that have come up with subdivisions, et cetera. We've gone through this document page by page, wordsmithing things, but I don't think that we've gotten deeper into the content to try to discuss if this document accurately represents what we want to see as content. That's just
I
my
agree.
opinion.
We've gotten into the nitty gritty, we've had the conversations. I think they're gonna be sticking points that we as a planning commission need to come together on what the objective is. And it'll provide us with a more comprehensive, broader understanding of what the overall objective is, as a cohesive product. Yes.
And I would like to see that get done before it goes to anybody, but I feel similar to Mrs. Rhodes and Mr. Wagner from the perspective of, I'd really like that this to be something that gets put forward to those boards and groups who are already representatives of these citizens that have a vested interest in this, before we go out to other people to then get their comments for us to go back to the table and make revisions. But that's also just
I totally agree with
my
you.
vision.
We haven't, like I said, we haven't stepped back and looked at the overall impact of this whole ordinance, what it's going to do, how it goes together, how it's enforced, and so forth, and I think, like I say, a lot of what we've done is without really, I think, really understanding what we were working for.
Just like that,
I would a whole lot rather take a little more time and be right and put something out there to the public or to anyone else that we can't be comfortable with.
Well, if I may, I would like to do this concurrently. One of the things with the planning commission, it is time for content. But one of the goals of getting this draft, like we're trying to get through tonight, was like you said, now you've got a document that you can work with and you can look at the content. Ideal situation for me as far as getting these ordinances to the Board of Supervisors in a timely manner is I need the input so I can make the proper recommendations that represent the Planning Commission, that represent all the other boards. I would prefer to do it concurrently where the Planning Commission is doing the content part of it along with the work group that we're putting together to do that part of the content, and then bring those two groups together, the Planning Commission with their content, work group with their content, bring them together, and then we'll have a document that we can take to the public for their comments, and then approach the Planning Commission at the same time, make all this available to the EDA, to the Board of Supervisors, and joint work sessions can occur concurrently with the work group that's going on. All of this is to help efficiencies and to get a full-blown document, if you will, because these ordinances, you know how permanent they are, and how important they are. So, and again, we can discuss timing later.
I agree to going ahead and going concurrently if we're going to do this. I will tell you right now, if the work groups come in here and they want to make any wholesale changes to benefit the developers, one of the things we want to be sure that we're doing is we're expediting development, the kind of development we want in this county. But at the same time, I'm not one bit interested in doing things to, I don't want to say help the developers. I'm all for working with them. But if they come in here and want a lot of changes to benefit them, you're going to find them to be really hard.
And that, and this coming to the Planning Commission first. Y'all will, anything that that's what the whole point of this exercise is to make sure that all of that is protected and represented.
And I don't want to take anything to Mr. Greenwood that we're not comfortable with.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I think it may be hard to keep the revisions straight from when they're being done concurrently as to just the simple document itself that's being updated.
Oh, I'm going to have two completely different sets of
Absolutely.
documents.
When you go to the work groups, I do expect that it would be totally separate from that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the whole point of this.
Ms. Glassenberry?
Mr. Chairman, may I speak?
Yes, please.
Listening to this discussion, I'd like to bring in just a little bit of clarification. I am very supportive of the work group. I think that it is going to be critical to get citizens' input. Now, they are not at the same level of recommendation as the planning commission or the board of supervisors, but they are necessary so that when we push out these revised ordinances, that they let us know the landmines that we're going to be running up against. Because when you're talking large landowners, developers that own a great quantity of property in this county, they're going to mount an offensive. We'd like to know what it is before we start pushing it out. Because the first thing the board of supervisors is going to ask us is, have you gotten citizen input? And, public hearings are great, but this work group is a good way of finding out what the landmines are going to be. That does not mean that they are going to make a recommendation and we're going to walk it up to you and say, this is the recommendation and we need to change the ordinances. We're going to bring it to you and say, these are the comments they have made. The EDA representative is Joyce Wolf. Her background is planning and zoning. Yes, it would be great to be able to have this, paraded out in front of all of our commissions and boards. But the reality is, just like y'all, they don't have the time and they don't have the knowledge in some instances. So what Mr. Etter has tried to do is find the people on those commissions and boards that truly do have the knowledge. So Joyce Wolf has committed to be part of the work group to bring back the information on the revision of the ordinances to the EDA. Now, yes, we will have combined meetings at a point, but you're not going to see the input that you think you're going to see. Maybe in a few instances, but not overall. Mr. Etter has told you that he's going to push this out to the BZA, he's going to push this out to the Historical Preservation Committee. He is seeking the input. But I do want you to know, though, I do support the work group. I think that it is critical. But don't think that what they say and recommend is going to change what this commission is planning. And y'all are doing this in a vacuum because y'all are the ones that are delegated this responsibility. And, I'm sorry, but
Oh, I agree 100% with the work groups. I have no issue with the work groups. It's just the work groups that are being devised for the benefit of the input of the EDA and the other county officials before we do. That is what I just didn't understand, is that the EDA and these other county folks are going to be speaking in the work group and not directly to us in terms of developing the product.
they are simply sitting there like their peers.
But they're providing input too, correct?
They're, like Joyce Wolf, she will be at that work group, she will be representing the EDA. Same when we come to the comprehensive plan. We will be doing the same process. But, no, she's not gonna be speaking for y'all.
No, not for us, but she's going to be speaking to the other shareholders, and it'll be a conversation that we've not had the benefit of having with the EDA.
Okay?
I support, all I'm saying is I agree with the work group concept, absolutely. We want to understand what those concerns are. It's just, it would be helpful to have those conversations with the EDA on the forefront with this commission, as opposed to after they've had the dialogue.
So who would you want to have the meetings with? The EDA, the BCA, the Historical Preservation Board, not the Board of Supervisors, because that is not going to be part of this.
No, I haven't, that's been made very abundantly clear to me.
That is the final person that you're going to take it to.
I understand.
But I would like to say something. Y'all have been spending hours and hours and hours of time and staff time going over this ordinance. And to hear now that you want to look at content is a little disturbing. I thought that's what we were doing. Wordsmithing for how many months now? That's not okay. If y'all
Now, I
want to
think
now turn
you
around
should
and do
be
a content,
I'm sorry, I think you should be concerned if we didn't want to have a more comprehensive understanding of the plan.
so what is it that you have been doing for the last several months?
I'm sorry, is this in order?
Well, thank you for the clarification. I think that helps a lot. But, no, when you go through a document, word for word, and the document is changing, a lot of things are changing from what the ordinance that we've been used to. You tend to, and the last time the comprehensive plan and any work on the ordinance was done in this county, that's exactly what happened. They got stuck on wordsmith. And I think we've been trying to keep away from that, but you can't help but doing that when you're going through a document line by line. So in doing that, it's kind of hard to really look at the big picture at the same time. Now, I think some of us have been trying to do that, look at the big picture, but I do appreciate the comment. And with that, I would just ask for agreement to go ahead with what Mr. Edder is proposing, but at the same time, let's us continue looking at the document. And what I would say is after we finish tonight, and if we need another,
Well, this sort of-
if we need another session to finish that up, once we get through that, and you're going out to the workers, then let's go ahead and take a good hard look at it, maybe 1 or 2 work sessions, to make sure we've got things in place the way we think they need to be. There may be some changes in the final document from that, but hopefully we won't be in that position. But I agree with Bonnie. Just sitting here watching what's going on, we have been on an awful lot of questions. And that's unfortunate, but it's yes, please.
What I would like to point out is, I don't know every word for word of what our current document is. And so part of what we have had to go through with this document doesn't indicate what changes were made from what the current is. And so we have had to go page by page, and it has been a lot to try to go back and try to determine what we've changed versus what exists today, to make sure that we know and agree to all the things that have been changed. So, yes, I think we've had to go page by page. Was that necessarily the right way for us to approach, or the time frame that it was right to approach? Maybe not, but that's why I'm trying to get to today, and especially with the Berkeley group here, that rather than going page by page, I would like us to talk about content while we have them here, to discuss any of those things that are of concern to us, or that we just simply want their input on so we better understand before we go, before we have any other page by page
Mr. Chairman?
revisions.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
The Berkeley group is on retainer with us. So even if we don't get through something here or anything else, I have complete access, and I'm hoping, I'm not looking, but I'm hoping Rebecca's nodding her head right now. And as we move forward and as other additional work sessions or anything y'all come up with this, I still will take that and we'll still be doing the same thing. It's not, once we finish going through this, that we stop. I mean, the whole point of all of this is so that we can produce an ordinance that will stand the test of time. So all of those, all the resources that we have been applying to this, we still apply to this.
And I'm not opposed to the work group. I guess it's just from a standpoint of, I would hope that we would have had more of a finished document before they got started looking at it. And I don't know that we'll be able to finish tonight, but I do understand the importance of the work group and don't
But I think we're-
have an opposition to that.
Are all of you on board with going ahead with the work groups? And meanwhile, we will finish our review up, and then if necessary, we'll take an additional session to make sure we've got the document together, the final document, the draft of the final document together the way we think it needs to be to go to the budget. Mr. Hatter, once you go through with the work groups, then we will be, that will be coming back to us to who will present the work groups?
Oh, I'll be coming, oh, if we have a works with one of the things that I hope to accomplish, because I'm not an us and them person, I think it's everybody together. I will want at least one work session where the work group and the planning commission is sitting here going through where they don't see eye to eye particularly. Give everybody a chance, everybody, all the stakeholders a chance to get it out of their system. And then that gives all of us, both sides, work group, planning commission, community development department, an opportunity to see where the county needs to be with the ordinances. So I see at least one joint work session where everybody's talking to everybody else. And then once that is completed, then of course I will come to the planning commission with the results of the work group, planning commission work sessions. And that's when it'll come to y'all formally. And then at that point, we should have a document that we can all be confident in.
I got a suggestion, once we get with the work group, that found document together, we'll be going out to the public information meetings. I would recommend that the public information meetings be set up out here in the lobby. I'm not sure where you're planning on having those meetings, but I think we tried it in the districts last time. It didn't seem to work out. But my suggestion is we had 4 or 5 workstations out in the lobby for an hour before the public comment, public information meeting, to be able to explain as best we can to the public, members of the planning commission and staff, and the work group, working with the public to get their, help them understand what we're doing.
And at that point, more than 90% confident it will be held here, those kind of informational meetings, because like you said, any satellite is probably not going to work.
It did not work in the past.
Right, and I don't, from what I've seen so far, I don't think it would be effective. But yes, those kind of details, when we finally are through everything, everybody's happy, we'll work that out.
All right, with that, we'll go ahead, as you've outlined, keep us abreast of how that's going.
Yes, sir. Of course.
And let's see, next item on the agenda is the staff and special committee reports of zoning law, the January land disturbance, January code report. We have those copies of those. I did meet with Mr. Eder yesterday, and there are, as I told him, there are several things going on in the county that we're not aware of, and I would like, in the future, to have a report at each meeting on, as development starts, as construction starts, certainly, to have a briefing on what's going on, where the planning staff is on that, where the developer is on that. So we'll have a better understanding. I ride around some, but I don't know what's going on in the Lord.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I took your advice, and it's not a complete document, but if you look at the King William County Monthly Building Report dated January 2020, which y'all should have all this, staff and I, and let's go with staff, is revising this building report to help identify those areas and give us an ability to share with the Planning Commission what's going on. And what I reviewed this earlier. If you go down to our commercial, where we have 2 building permits that were issued, one of those was for Ailett Mini Storage 2. So the building permit was issued so they could start work. And the other building permit was issued for Hampton Road Sanitation District to improvements they're making on their Quinton Road, or Quinton Church facility. So both of those, and what I'm going to try to do each regular meeting is highlight the ones that I know you were concerned with, and I'm sure the rest of the commissioners are as well. But when we issue a building permit, that means they're ready to start work. Generally, they were ready to start work a week before they get their building permit, but this is a good indication, and what I'll do is I'll break out the individual commercial developments like I did tonight. These two permits, one was for Lake Storage 2, one is for HRSD. We're also, one of the changes we're going to make to this to make it more friendly for the planning commission is we're going to break out the land disturbance permits. As it stands, we've issued 19 land disturbance permits. We're going to break that out between commercial and residential to make it easier for us to track and to make it clear for what's going on in the county day by day. And of course, if you have any specific questions on the staff reports, I'm happy to answer them.
Another thing, I see this is a little bit better than what we've gotten in the last couple of months. I couldn't read anything.
And
Yeah, it's nice.
we recognized we needed improvement, so staff did a great job, I think, of working
I
on
will
it.
say, with the zoning logs, they get harder to read. A lot of months, we just have a lot more stuff coming into our office than some months. So this month, we just haven't had a lot come in as of now. Whereas some months, it just makes it harder to fit on that one page versus it being broken up. So that's why sometimes it does look a little.
I don't mind 2 or 3 pages, just so I can read.
Okay, all right.
It's good.
All right, and any comments? If not, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn to a work session.
So moved.
Any comments? Any, or Ms. Paul, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Rhodes,
Aye.
Mr. Greenwood,
Aye.
Ms. Height,
Aye.
and Chairman Wagner.
Aye. And with that, we will now adjourn to the work session. Y'all want to just sit here? Or would you like to move down?
No, yeah.
We can just sit right here.
But who's turning red?
I think it's just static. Is that one on? And this one had that one.
This is sort of a management subsection. It's not real pretty. To start.
All right.
So I'm going to adjourn to the work session.
Pieces. Seems like we're going.
You okay with your, because I don't think you're gonna have a
I'm trying to
whole,
fill it in.
can you speak from that?
It's like I had to build. Nobody's doing it. You know,
All right. Everybody ready to go?
I mean, if they need to speak, they're probably gonna have to use the mic.
Okay. So you want to.
I'll call the work session to order.
Put it together. You want to frame.
Go ahead and call the roll for the record.
Ms. Rhodes,
Aye.
Understand.
Here, sorry.
Mr. Greenwood,
Here.
Ms. Height,
Here.
and Chairman Wagner.
Here. All right, last time, January 27th meeting, we got through page 91, so we will be starting tonight on page 91, but before we get into that,
So, last year.
I would first ask the Berkeley group if they had any comments from our last prior meeting.
Oh, okay. I saw something. It's signs.
I'll just start by saying it's a pleasure being back with you. I'll just start by, Rebecca Cobb for the record with the Berkeley Group, and I'll just say it's a pleasure to be back with you tonight. Thanks for having us back. And we've gone through most of what we talked about last time and started incorporating those changes. And so those are looking good, and we're just looking forward to working through as much as we can tonight with you. I believe last time we left off at the land use matrix, and some of that conversation was lending itself to the very next section, which is the design standards. And so we've already started putting in some of those design standards that you've requested. So looking forward to discussing further.
Great. All right, at the last work session now, and each one of you, Stephen, if you got to put let's see, at that meeting on Article 4 administration, we agreed to require the applicant for rezoning to provide a site plan and traffic impact analysis for rezoning a property. This would eliminate speculative zoning. I think we had agreed on that, and we'll move forward with that unless anybody has objections.
Mr. Chairman, that was one of the issues that you wanted me to talk to the county attorney about.
Yes.
And we did talk about it, and it is a policy decision as far as the ordinance goes, not so much any sort of legal issues with it. Bottom line is, if you require site plans for each individual one, it's not as business friendly as if you do. So again, purely a policy thing, not a problem at all on the legal side.
Y'all have any comments?
No, bored of that.
Next thing, we also discussed moving Division 1 to Article 4 or Division 1 of Article 4 to another location in the ordinances. It did not seem to fit with the administration. Berkeley Group, Rebecca, did you all look at that?
So, yes, and actually I've started on rearranging that section. I think it will fit within the same article, but we'll just move it around.
Okay. The heading of the article is administration, and not the way it was put out there. It didn't seem to fit as a thing to start off with administration.
So we have changed that now, that it actually starts with Planning Commission under administration and goes through Board of Zoning Appeals, and then the amendment actually comes down later with like the zoning map and that sort of thing.
Thank you. Under Article 2, discussion, it was agreed to seek an opinion from the county attorney as to the relevance of including the use for adult entertainment and definitions of the use matrix. And would this be in defiance of freedom of speech? I did look at the New Kent County ordinance today. They have pretty much the exact same wording, but I'm still interested in what the county attorney had to say about that.
And just as a side note, New Kent is in the process of redoing all their ordinances right now as well. So, but I did talk to the county attorney, and his answer, where is his answer? Is that yes, adult entertainment is definitely a First Amendment issue. That I just want to make sure I don't misquote him at all. So his take on it was, if you have an ordinance, then you have some protection. If you do not have an ordinance, you don't. They are permitted by use, and he gave me a couple of court cases where the adult entertainment provider, I guess, very successfully won suits and then was able to tell the county, no, you can't tell me what to do because you don't have, your ordinance doesn't give us a thing. So his recommendation was that it be included in the ordinance. And I did not have him review the entire requirements, but he does say he has some documentation to help us if we want to tweak that.
Anything he has, we'd like to see it for the next session, if he's got it. But for now, I will say that since my first objection to that, the language has been cleaned up a lot, the way it's laid out, and I think with that, we need to go ahead and move ahead with that. I do appreciate the feedback. All right, now, I've got some other comments, we'll take them up as we go through, so let's move ahead with the Article 8, Use and Design Standards. We ought to be able to move through this quickly.
What page is this?
91.
Thank you.
Does anyone have anything that I will say as you're kind of looking through this? Anything that stands out as not fitting in there or being misplaced or anything of that nature, rather than trying to go through here, unless you've got some specific comments regarding changes that you think need to be made. One thing I had, looking on page 95, just looking at some of the recreation facility and so forth, our swimming pools covered by the building code. We don't have anything that's a swimming pool, but I believe the building code does that
Yes, sir.
as far as fencing and.
Yeah, there's definite swimming pool standards as far as attractive nuisance and safety on building codes.
Anyone else have anything so far? We'll move on to the review. I will make one comment on the building amendment, 6161, the second line, citizens of the city. We'll change that, county, that's a little worse than that.
Where is that?
Maybe 6161 on page 99, the second line. Through the line, it says city instead of county. Thank you all for coming.
Yes, and I wanted to go over just a couple of things too while we are on the design standards. Last time we talked about private shooting range and distances. 100 feet from road was mentioned. I did a little research, looking at Department of Game and that sort of thing. And there's other localities also adopt the 100 feet from road and also a 300 feet or 100 yards from a dwelling. And so I am suggesting that for you all. And if there's no immediate complaints, we'll move forward with that one. Also, we talked about family day home and the changes to the 2019 code, and I believe you all were supplied with the code changes that relate to land use, so that everyone would have that for you to look at. Not all of them relate directly to the zoning ordinance, but I thought they would be beneficial to you all. But so what we're suggesting for the family day home is actually breaking that apart into two definitions, to have the one that's 1 to 4 children be your by right use, and then 5 to 12 can be a conditional use. Now, part of the 2019 change was actually to allow the county to do an administrative approval of that 5 to 12 children. That process we can put into the design standards. that says, when the application comes in, a letter is sent to the adjacent landowners. They have 30 days to respond. If there is no response, then it can be administratively approved. If there is a negative response, it can either be approved or denied or sent before you all for consideration. So if that's something you would like to add, we can have that in your ordinance if you want to do an administrative approval of the 5 to 12 children.
Appreciate the clarification, and I love the idea of splitting it up. I think, I'm not hot on the idea of having an administrative approval, but I don't really think it's gonna be an issue here. If we were in a real populated area, maybe it would make more sense, but I don't know how the other commissioners feel about it. Is that pretty stock language in terms of the administrative approval? You just refer to provisions of Virginia code?
So yes, I would probably spell out a little bit of detail as far as that there are 30 days, for them to respond, and then refer to the code, yes.
So in other words, it would just, the administrative approval would be that it wouldn't be coming before the commission?
Correct, not necessarily, unless there were complaints, and then it could come before you as a decision.
Right. So it's not a big deal if it's a single-family home. It is a big deal if it's a townhome. Right. And we don't have a whole lot of those, so again, 15 years it could be an issue, but otherwise it might not be. So do we need to make a determination on that this evening in terms of, does it make sense to you all what she's recommending?
Makes sense
What
to
she's
me, yes.
explaining? Okay.
What I could do is draft the language for you to take a look at, because I know I just, rattled off a bunch of information. You need a little time to digest it, so we can, draft that in and kind of flag it as a note for you to take a look at it later.
I think we'll keep it as a conditional use permit for now with the flag that it is a potential administrative
It's
option.
That's good. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, I apologize for being tardy at that time.
We understand, I'm sorry. You're about to move on.
And I also apologize for where we're at right now.
Okay, we're on about page 100.
We're on 102,
Oh,
I think.
And we are actually following along in a revised version that has additional comments and things, so if you could just clarify the title of the section as you're, rather than the page numbers as well, that would be helpful to us.
Again, we're wordsmithing on 86-169, page 103, outdoor display. Item 4, right at the bottom of 86-169, the sidewalks 5 feet or less, and we have 4. 4 blocks, I'm not sure.
Mr. Chairman, if I may. On 86-167,
Anywhere else? Okay.
that's really the main one. The 2 stories and 30 feet is what I thought we had talked about. And this one here was higher. Did you all talk about that in order to do it as a proposed draft?
Where are you on? 167? 3,
Number 4,
4, storage buildings shall be limited to 3 stories, 45 feet in height.
I think we may, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we decided to go with consistency that everything is limited to 45 feet, and that we weren't going to, I'm trying to remember our
No,
conversation.
and again, I just wanted to, so we have fire trucks that'll go that high?
Right, that's why everything is limited in the county. Everywhere else, when we talk about height, it's 45 feet max, 3-story max, because of the lack of ladder truck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that was actually one of the
Any other comments? Going forward.
Have comments on, if no one has anything before it, on section 86-177.
Okay.
Anyone have anything before that?
Or,
Oh, I think the "or" is taken out,
Just take it
right,
out.
with a period? I think we just, unless we drop something, then I don't know that we did.
okay. I didn't catch that.
I wanted to know what's in the current ordinance now in terms of short-term business rentals.
We don't address it.
Can I ask, it'd be helpful for me to understand the rationale behind the inclusion of the language.
Well, what we needed to do is because there are short-term rentals going on in the county that we aren't regulating,
Okay,
and we didn't have any, we wanted to be able to regulate that.
okay. So I have a question. How is a short-term rental, and this is a question, different than someone who has a one-year lease, who isn't so regulated? Why would we incorporate, see, this type of short-term rental I see in urban cities all the time, because they're stacked one on top of another in a condominium. But I'm not aware of short-term rentals. If you go on Airbnb and you go on VRBO, I think there may be 2 or 3 that I'm aware of. There are no places to stay. So I don't like the provisions generally, because I don't think we have an issue here, but I haven't been here as long as you all have been, so maybe someone can elaborate on that. I don't have a problem with people paying a tax on it. I just don't understand, people should be able to lease their properties, why we would come down with what I see as a hammer to limit them from being able to operate on a short-term basis. You're gonna have the same issue with noise in a leased apartment as you would with a VRBO. Same, I mean, all the issues would be the same, so.
And again, and you can jump in here anytime, but mine was more preemptive, because I see that I know the problems that City of Richmond and Rico, other places have had with the Airbnb and all of that. And that's really why
Okay.
this was included.
I'm not a proponent for making law just to make law. I understand being preemptive about it is important, but I do not see it at all as being an issue in King William County. And I want to speak to, I value everyone else's opinion on it, but from my perspective, if someone wants to rent their cottage out on a temporary basis and there's a noise issue, well, we have noise ordinances. If they're not maintaining the property, well, that would be no different than an owner who's not maintaining his property. So here's where I see it. Northern Virginia, high-rise, hundreds of people living on top of each other, and people walking down corridors that strangers, they don't know one another. And I see real issues there, security issues, et cetera.
So one thing to address, the difference you asked about, a year lease. So this does say that it would be a 30-day,
Right.
short-term, 30 days. We can certainly tailor this and remove some of it that you might not feel needs to be controlled. The thing I would say is probably still important to have it in there. I come from a small locality similar to this one that there was a concern when one popped up in a community that had a very rural road that GPS didn't always take the people to the correct residence. And so neighbors did become concerned about the amount of traffic, who was going to be staying, what type of activities might they do there, would they have enough wayfinding to get to the appropriate location, things like that. And we didn't have anything in our ordinance to address it, and I wish that we had. So that's a scenario that you might encounter.
There's no place to stay. I mean, I look, we have family come all the time, and there's no place to stay. I'd love it if they were a VRBO. I can count, I think they're less than 5 here. I just think this is an awful lot lot to address, what I don't see as being an issue at all.
And some communities do make that decision, that it's just, that they've determined not to regulate it. So there is that option.
And in my opinion, I would rather have, again, I'm preemptive, I'd rather have this on here so if it suddenly pops up that we suddenly have 4 or 5 different places in Kennington renting out their houses for, 3 nights.
But I
That
think
we
this
have
says
things in
if
place.
3 people complain about it, so you get 3 people who complain about it, the county can come in and say, you're out. They can't do that with a private lease with someone who's under a year lease. Why would we have this kind of regulation on someone who's renting for, 350 days as opposed to a year?
No, 30 days.
I understand, but I'm just saying, why would you, why?
To stop bad things, well, I know with City of Richmond, it wasn't so much what would happen is you rent your house out to the bachelor party for the weekend that was coming in. Of course, if you had that with a lease, the neighbors would just complain to the cops and the county couldn't do anything about it. If you have that guy, if you have those 3 consecutive complaints, then there's a problem with that lease.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, three substantiated complaints. So 3 complaints, my neighbor doesn't like me, blah, 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 but there's a complaint that's been substantiated, it's becoming a nuisance. We don't have the kind of problems Virginia Beach has, we don't have the kind of problems Richmond has, but we may have problems in the future. We actually had a scenario a couple of years back where there was someone who was leasing out his rooms and wasn't there, became a nuisance to the neighbors, and it became a problem. And I think it still is a problem. And some of the neighbors didn't like the activities going on there, but others didn't care for the noise and the traffic and those
But
sorts
that
of
could be
things.
true of any owner, and it becomes a private issue. So all I'm saying is if the planning commission wants to keep it in, I'm for it. I view it as a very urban ordinance.
I think a problem here in the county is we have no motel, no hotels.
That's
no
part of
bed
my-
and breakfast. We don't have a
We don't have
whole
it.
lot of big place for people to stay. So I think, in looking toward the future and hopefully getting some tourism coming into the county, hopefully we'll have places, there will be places available for people to stay. So in that regard, I would like to see it stay in there.
And so right now, just for clarification purposes, on the use table, that is a by right use in the agricultural, and it's a conditional use in your other 2 residential districts, just for the record.
Except if you mind repeating that, I'm
So
sorry.
it's by right in your agricultural, and then it's conditional in the RR and R1 district.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I wanted to state the broader concern before nitpicking. If it's gonna stay in here, I'd probably have recommended changes to simplify it a little bit, because it's 5 pages of ordinance to something that's not an issue currently. In any event, that would be my fault.
And if there are things that aren't necessary, I wouldn't mind having it shorter as well. I did have one quick question though on page 107. It's item number 5, which begins on the previous page, number E. The principal shall be at least 18 years of age. Are we allowed to require them to be 21 or older?
The principal guest, not the owner.
But not, the principal guest who is signing off as the person who's leasing it. The earlier draft it had 21 years old, because what we're finding, again, it's probably not going to happen here in King County, but you'll have 18, 19-year-olds having parties and making a big racket, and most of the problems that I've read about have been 18, 19 years old. Any reason why we can't limit it to 21 years old or older?
None that I know of, and I think it's a good idea. Do you know?
I just would question if these are going to be
Ms. Rhodes,
Yes, sir.
if you want, what I would like, would you go through that section and then go ahead and email it to me? And I'll share it with the Berkeley group.
Sure.
And we can revise that way.
Sounds
See if
good.
we can clean it up.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you. Any other comments? Paper 6197, any other comments on that? If not, we'll move on to Article 9, non-conforming uses. Any comments on non-conforming units? Or if not, we'll move on to Article 10, signs.
Well, actually, before, if I have one, Mr. Chairman, I think, again, I've not looked this in a few days because of other situations I've been in. Page 111, 86-199. We allow an enlargement of a non-conforming structure. Any idea of why do we allow that? And I'm not sure I'm against it, I'm just not sure why, if it's already non-conforming, we would allow them to make it bigger, non-conforming.
So, being a legally non-conforming use is a provision of state code,
Okay.
and you are allowed to expand that, I'm sorry, a non-conforming structure. What we're basically saying here is that we are now going to tell you how you are allowed to expand the legally non-conforming structure. And each of those, how you can expand kind of is nuanced throughout this chapter.
And it's not a change. That's not a change from our
Same as
existing
the-
ordinance.
It's the same as it.
Yes, it's the same as current.
Okay, and that seems, if that seems reasonable to everybody, I'm fine, it's non-conforming, but you can make it bigger, and it just jumped that at me.
Within limits.
Okay.
There's limits to how much bigger you can
Elsewhere,
make it.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
You have comments? And move on to signs, page 113, Article 10. This has been changed according to new laws and regulations, is that correct?
Yes, so this is one, and Rebecca can speak to this more, but this is one section that was completely different than the previous drafts that you reviewed, because we were kind of taking it a step further based on some of our more recent experience with other localities in complying with READ. And so we've incorporated some of that additional experience into this draft that you've seen versus what we've provided in the past, so.
We don't really address in here, businesses or real estate or construction. We more regulate the sign itself, not the content of the sign.
Correct, yes.
For Mr. Chairman, may I ask? So, and again, I apologize, I had read this extensively a few weeks ago, and I've not looked at it recently because of my personal situation. Political signs that are larger than are allowed here, are they specifically addressed that people are allowed to do that? So,
You're still not allowed to go on the physical part of it. We can't regulate content, but we can regulate size. So just because it has political content doesn't give it a right to exceed the ordinance.
because Manassas some years ago had about a 30 by 30 foot sign, about 3 blocks from City Hall. I grew up in Manassas. And
I worked for Manassas, I
Okay.
came from Manassas.
And as I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, they had a lot of nasty things to say on the sign towards the city government. And it was only when they got close to being threatening that something was done about it. Am I misstating that in any way?
So, I mean, again, Manassas recently updated its sign ordinance in compliance with READ and took a very similar approach in your residential districts. Any kind of sign, it has to be this size. So,
And that passes constitutional muster.
Right, so you wouldn't, be saying political signs are this size, or yard sale signs are this size. Those are temporary signs. If it's, little stakes in the ground, simple temporary signs, then that's what you call it, and that's how you regulate it in your ordinance.
And that passes constitutional muster. Okay.
Any regulation on the number of signs, for instance, real estate signs where they come into a property and put 100 signs up, 100-foot section advertising the property for sale or whatever?
None that we have right now.
So we did do, you'll notice a couple of tables, and those tables list out the types of signs, and you'll see the very next column says number, so that's where you could say how many signs per lot, and then it talks about area, so the size of the sign, and height, the height of the sign.
If you look at 117, page 117, they do have some limitations on.
We had a problem years ago when I was working with the real estate signs on the right of way, and they would be hundreds of them, bank and proper property. Any other questions on, or comments on signs? All right, let's move on to Article 11, landscaping. General comments I've got. I looked at the Hanover County ordinance, and they have list of types of trees, heights, so forth, how tall they get in 5 years, and that kind of thing. But it's really helpful, and I know that we're going to beat out, we have a list of the types of, allowable types of trees. I don't know whether that needs to be necessarily included in the ordinance, but perhaps you might want to look at providing information that can be referred to.
So one of the things that how far you want to go with your landscaping standards is really up to you as a locality. Some localities get very specific in your landscaping ordinance. And as a reminder, your staff has to administrate that ordinance. And so you might see the larger localities with a lot of staff having more complex guidelines. Also, as a reminder that there's costs associated with landscaping, but as are there many benefits of community character. So it really comes down to how your decision as a community on how far you want to go. So we've developed these guidelines. I'm not sure how different they are from your original ones, or if you have a landscaping, so you didn't have one at all. So this is kind of moving the needle, and this is what we have proposed in other localities that are interested in having a landscaping ordinance and kind of starting to initiate that without going so far as to being so prescriptive about specifically what trees and what size and things like that.
Now, a little from staff standpoint, and when you get too specific, you don't get the kind of compliance you want anyway. And then to Ms. Rhodes' comments about onerous, extra stuff, when you start, because Chesterfield prescribes what you can put in your front yard. They tell you what kind of tree, and how far it's got to be. When you get into that level, when I went through this, I like the setup, it's very flexible, but will offer the county a lot of beautification out here. That's,
Don't want to bring it up, but like Janie says, I mean, we have this stuff in here, and like Mr. Etter says, their building department is so small. I know half the businesses around here are supposed to have buffering, like this, section 86-241, number 3. It says screenings and plantings shall be maintained in perpetuity. I know many of these businesses, they have the Leland's and cedars, and there wasn't a good pop tree, and they're all dead, they're brown or black or falling down, and they're not replacing them. But it also says, within 30 days notice from the zoning administrator. Well, as our zoning administrator spoke to us, he is so busy and so understaffed that it's by complaint only. So if nobody complains or tells them about it, this doesn't mean anything, so.
but if we don't have it, Mr. Greenwood, then I can enforce it.
So.
And see, I mean, the
I
thing
guess it's like
is,
Janie says, to have it, even though we don't use it right now, or can enforce it right now, would be better than not having it, and then we couldn't do anything if we're able to.
right, and I mean, that's a lot of what this ordinance, the revisions of the ordinance, one of the things that prompted this in general was so that the county could enforce some things that should be able to be enforced.
My comment on that is, this ordinance is going to be with us, I hope, for another 5 years at least. Maybe not 15 years like it was in the past.
Right,
But
I mean, that this part is
I
not
hope
new,
that
is it?
we as a county will be growing, moving forward, and our commercial development will be much better, and I think we need this ordinance to take care of that.
And you might be mistaken,
May want to move a little bit.
we haven't had a landscaping ordinance, but the TCO does have, in the transportation corridor, there are things that should have been happening. So that's
Well,
why
I mentioned, this is, right, the big, huge propane tanks are on Route 30, and you see them all now, because all the trees that are supposed to screen them are dead, and like at the Fleetwood, all that stuff is dead, and all you see the school buses and all those rotten cars.
To address one of your concerns, we actually went to Fleetwood because of that bus. That bus is no longer there.
Like, maybe not the bus, but I can
Yeah,
still
they're
see.
working on their
right, I can
fence,
Still
and
see
they're-
it,
they're
the side,
baby
and see all
steps,
the
baby
cars,
steps.
right from 360.
But we were able to enforce what we had
Right,
because of the TCO. Now, this would give us more little teeth.
Yeah, okay.
I'll give you the rest of that.
No, then I have to respond.
That'll be more than
Okay, anything more on the landscaping? Move on to exterior lighting standards. Okay, see the thing there. that gives me heartburn.
I don't have anything about the, I guess I probably should have brought this up at the meeting. I do have something about these signs, that LED sign has gone berserk again. It's so bright, the nighttime dimmer is busted again on
Okay.
360, so. I don't to mention this.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're blinded as we come up 360
I
at
know
nighttime.
You ride that stretcher road.
Not very often, at late at night.
Which sign is this?
Third line.
The one for the King William Square, that's the new LED one that always busts.
It's almost on a quarterly
Yeah.
system where you just kind of
Like
and
Bojangles.
we have to call in.
Handmade.
Okay, let's move on to Article 13, off-street parking and loading on page 116.
the daycare center, just make sure that that's consistent with the parking. There's a reference on page 129 that we need to break it out for between 4 and 12, whatever the number is.
Right, yes, okay. Well, and-
Split it out.
That's actually daycare center and not the family day home.
As long as the nomenclature is properly used, then that's fine.
Page 131, design standards, 2 at the bottom of the page. Minimum space area for the purpose of regulations, this article, and off-street parking spaces, and all weather surface area not in the street or alley, and having an area of not less than 162 square feet. We don't address the width of these spaces.
Typically, if you're talking about the width of parking spaces, they're typically, a small space is gonna be 9 feet at the minimum, but some places like that have larger trucks might wanna make that 10 feet.
It's the best engineering practice.
Yeah. Again, you don't need to get that prescriptive if you, but.
Is that something, Ron, that you believe staff can take care of and deal with? Because
Oh, yeah, that's a good engineering practice. Every site plan we review for a commercial thing, one of the things we look at,
yeah,
not only number of spaces, you
you
can't,
go into a parking lot, somebody's trying to save space, and you can 8-foot wide parking space, and then you have a truck that's 22 feet long, or 25 feet long, coming there and trying to.
yeah, but we ran into something similar to that 7-Eleven, and they got all real creative on making sure their spaces, I mean, you can't shrink them. I mean, we'll catch that. That's not something you can get away with. Engineers won't design it that way because then they're messed up.
Would you like to add 9 feet as the minimum, or do you just feel like it's fine?
A good, I don't know, like you said, that's, we need nine.
Well, the
2 feet.
problem if you added 9 feet as a minimum, is that then that's what they'll use as your
Yeah,
minimum.
and you might need 10,
Yeah.
so.
So in places where you're really constrained with development, then we'll add the 9 feet in as almost an encouragement, and some places might even have a maximum size. But here, you're not as land constrained, so it's not as much of an issue, and they're gonna be more looking at, they're gonna realize what their customer base is, and some of that you can leave to the engineers to identify.
Before we move off of that section, can I ask the question, do we have a section in here that addresses the, how many spaces are needed? For example, the gym that's gone into where the old King William auction is? Is that in one of these?
I think so.
It's probably there, I just haven't found it yet.
I think it's under, how do they do
So
that?
that might fall under,
The studio with personal service. That definitely fall there. I would think.
so there's a section that starts general retail, personal service, establishment, grocery store, financial institution, pawn shop, specialty shop. So all of those that would, have customers coming in and out. So I think it would go into that category and work there.
Okay, I was just curious, because I was thinking to myself, how, I come through at a time of night that it's been very busy, which is good to see that they have that many members that have joined. I was just wondering how you actually designate how many spaces that they would need, when they have their highest amount of members coming in, at any given time. That's all.
Any other questions on parking, comments? Let's move on to planning and development, mixed use on Article 14, page 134.
Because we don't still call it a PUD-M district, do we?
We removed the district itself.
Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, but I think.
I'm sorry, I'm at 86-300, number 1, I'm just, how we're designating.
So one of the comments that we had received from you on the last draft was to remove the PUD and district from the actual use matrix. So we'll want to make sure that, I'm not sure that
Right.
that actually got,
Yeah, we need to catch that, and that's
Mhm.
gotta be gone.
well, we still have the district, but it's just not in the use matrix. So you have it as an option for the rezoning, but the kind of the way that we have balanced that is to have the text here as the planned mixed-use district. And I think this might have actually been one of the things that we had identified in the presentation a few weeks ago as one of the areas that we just wanted to confirm with you all on how we were approaching this, because the district itself was remaining, but it had been removed from the use table. So we took that to mean that you didn't want to specifically define uses in the use table, but it might be an option that you would keep for potential rezoning. And then we modified the text slightly in this section to say that the specific uses would be based on the requirements of that rezoning.
Yeah, that works, but do we still call it PUD-M?
Yeah, it needs to just be PUD, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
that's what triggered me.
Sorry.
My trigger, sorry.
Because it is mixed. I think that's why.
Yeah, it's just, I want to encourage mixed use.
Okay.
Don't want to confuse
Do
anybody.
we currently have any mixed-use development in the county?
No, sir. No, sir.
We do?
We do not.
Oh, no, okay. Sorry. No, not left here.
Yeah, and I'm mumbling again, I apologize.
I have to turn my right ear. Any other questions
In the entire section, in the entire section.
in that section?
I do in 86-304 on page 136. The third item, any use is stated in the application is approved by the Board of Supervisors. Do we need the other three? If any use is allowable, if approved by the Board of Supervisors, why do we need anything else?
Because it's always going to be going in front of the Board of Supervisors.
So that was the phrase that we had actually added because the use that the column was removed in the use table.
So why do you need the other three?
Well, and not every use is going to be a conditional use. Some are just going to be permitted by right. Unless I'm reading it wrong.
referred to the use table, and so when the use table, that column was deleted, we saw that as an issue here, so we removed it and said approved by the Board of Supervisors. But you do have a good point about the others, and we'll take a look at that and figure out some better language there.
And I got one other one, 305, I think, in a while. Let's see, something about the zoning admin may or shall, I'm not sure.
The zoning administrator may consult with the planning commission and area agencies as appropriate. It would be one, the paragraph after 86.305(1)(e). Is that what you're referring to?
Yes. Thank you.
But I think may is, because we won't always consult with the planning commission.
Right, and so what would be the circumstances that you would want to or not want to?
If it's in a TCO, if it required zoning, if it can require a conditional use permit, we would come to the planning commission. Basically, that may is so that points out that not everything would have to come to the planning commission. Some things will.
I didn't know if it was worthwhile to spell that out or not.
Well, I mean,
Just one basic question.
Just a question there. Do we require public hearing, planning commission, board supervisor review in public hearings for residential subdivisions, major residential subdivisions?
most, I'd have to refer to the permit table, but major subdivisions require conditional use permit pretty much everywhere. If they require rezoning, definitely have to have a public hearing. So it's really hard to get a major, I can't figure out how you would avoid a public hearing for a major subdivision unless it was a cluster subdivision, which I'm prohibited from doing public hearings on.
But I would think land unit development would seem to me to come under the same.
It does.
Major subdivision.
Well, I mean, most of your planning unit development would be separate, an extra district, if you will, for a major subdivision. So it still have to meet all the requirements of the underlying district.
Seems like a rezoning would be required.
Almost always.
Yes.
I'm really, I can't, you don't think of where it
I
wouldn't be?
mean, wouldn't it always be
So,
required?
This is a special, we're defining this as a special planning district. And it seems like we might need to clarify a little bit more if this is intended as an overlay district or an underlying zoning district. Either of those things is going to require a public hearing for your rezoning.
Right.
Because it will be a map amendment, whether it's an overlay or an underlying zoning district. But since it's not entirely clear to me, since we removed it from the use table, that, to me, if it's in the use table, it's very clearly gonna be one of your, typical districts that has its own, not an overlay.
Okay.
But, I would see a planned unit development is going to be an underlying zoning district. You're just saying, we're going to define those uses based on each specific application. We're going to let an applicant come before us. We will look at the merits of the application. We will look at their concept plan as they presented it to us. And then we will make a decision based on that. Then it goes on to your zoning map
And that's
as
the
a
intent.
PUD,
Yeah.
but it has proffers, it has a development plan associated with it, and that's the process.
And that's
So,
the intent of it.
for
It's
a
all.
planned unit development, it's not permitted by right anywhere, correct?
No. Well, a planned unit development as a use would not, it would always require a public hearing.
It's not a use,
Yeah,
it's a
because it's a
district.
It's a district.
Yeah.
And the way this is written is actually almost thinking that you currently have land zoned PUD, which you do not.
So that's why I think, you know, it is gonna come before you. And it's,
Yeah. So in my experience with these, it's basically recognizing that the standard and very traditional Euclidean style of zoning, of separation of uses, is going to not necessarily accommodate all of the development that is the ideal for the 21st century. And here is a zoning district where we are opening ourselves to mixed-use development. We have these standards so that staff isn't necessarily at the table saying, oh, we can't accommodate this style of development that we actually want here in the county.
and so potentially you could take out, because you don't have any land zone that way, and you know these are gonna be coming before you, you could potentially in that paragraph take out that it may, you know, that he may consult with the planning commission, and just leave the part in there about other agencies. Because I think that's the heart that is really trying to achieve, is to be able to allow to go to those other agencies for responses and feedback.
It's a good point. I would suggest that too, because this is just for the pre-application meeting.
Right.
And in my experience as a staff planner, the pre-application meeting is with staff only. It doesn't include consultation, although he may let you know that he had a pre-application to discuss a development. You're just not actively involved in that discussion at that point in time.
I look at this planning development as being a pretty, sometimes pretty large and significant development. It does require rezoning. So how much information would we expect on rezoning?
So actually, I think you will be happy with the standards that are very specifically set here underneath item 2, under application requirements. And this is including what all of those requirements would be. It's talking about having a full master plan. And this is not necessarily going to be the kind of speculative development that you've expressed concern about. They're going to have to come to you with a proposal that, of their specific uses that they want, of the plan of development that they have. So that's what we're talking about here. We're accommodating this mixed-use development, but we want to know what it is that you're bringing to us. That's the idea here.
That makes more sense. Okay, any other questions, comments on planned unit development?
I have something on page 137, Chairman. 137, Roman numeral 9, location existing, environmental, topographical, and historical. Number 3 talks about identifying slopes of 25% or greater. 25%, why not 30, why not 20? Where does the 25 come from?
I'm going to assume Chesapeake Bay.
And so then, that was my first guess also, and why would the Chesapeake Bay Act require 25 versus 30 versus 20?
I don't know what engineering concepts they based all their stuff on. When you go through ENS and stormwater management certification training and all that, you know, most of these numbers are prescribed from some engineering study. Over time, they've learned that the 25% slope will result in much more erosion, and, yeah, it's all balancing act, but it's all engineering.
And the reason why I was asking that, elsewhere in the ordinance, we have differing slopes and proposals. So I was just wondering where the 25 came from.
Well, we have some 10 and 15% slopes somewhere. I can't remember exactly what that's called out for, but this would be something prescribed.
Okay, thank you.
Most subdivisions are either 15 or 20. Most subdivision ordinances.
And it's generated from the stormwater management.
Are these typical provisions in terms of us
Chairman, on page 144, this one has something before that. Number 2D. Yes. So it's actually the second bullet from the top. So you're going to change that to the 45 feet and 3 stories or whatever.
Where are you? I'm sorry.
On page 144 is it's the.
5 stories or 60 feet.
Beg pardon? But the single-family dwelling units, both attached and detached, maybe you start with the height or 50 feet. So we're dropping that to 3 stories and 45 feet? To be
Yes.
consistent with all the other sections.
Was that under general design?
And we have the
It's general
same,
standards.
same issue on A2 under standard applicable to commercial.
Yep. okay.
Yes.
I get a profit box or ladder truck.
I mean, that is a fair point. Like a lot of truck, you have to change your ordinance.
We'll make text amendment.
Okay.
So that would be a very legitimate reason to change the ordinance.
There you go.
So page 144, 3A2, we're changing that one also.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought I heard that, but.
Yes, sir. I mean, we still want to stay consistent for safety and all. And it is-
On that same page, the architectural standards, commercial structures, facade design, the facade design shall align with the architectural type of the county. What do we mean by that?
If you've driven through places, they don't want their Burger King to have the traditional Burger King colors, they want them all to have the colonial style. So it's a way to try to encourage businesses to all look good and to fit a certain style. Something I mention all the time, I like the village feel, like the village mail. So this would give us a mechanism to make sure that commercial development all follow the same architectural style, so you wouldn't
As
get.
long as you've got a general idea of what that is, so it's uniformly applied,
Yes,
I don't think that we'll get in trouble. What it looks like, I don't know. It's an application without having a standard that would cause concern.
What it is it's really telling the developer that we want to see architectural elevations when you make your application. And we would like you, there may be comments associated with that. I mean, that's really,
What it's-
to your point, it's not, we're not going so far as to say these are the design guidelines.
Okay.
Although, hey, maybe one day you decide you do want to have some
Can we
design
say-
guidelines that are, help to further clarify what that means to you, and it could be voluntary. But, I think key here is that you're saying we want an interesting design that's appropriate to this community.
And it's allowing you to comment on the design.
Can we say what you said, rather than saying that the facade design shall align with the architectural style of the county? Because I have no idea what the architectural style of the county is, and what you have proposed within the transportation corridor overlay district may not be what I would want to see in a planning.
oh, absolutely not.
I think if what you said, require a design review, architectural design review, would make a lot more sense and clarify how you would handle that.
Yeah, we can, it's not, just to be clear, it's not within a historic district, so it's not going to go before any kind of architectural review board. It would just be here that elevations would be under review, but we can double check that and
Yeah, I
see
think
where
we
that
can
would
come
be
up with some-
appropriate
Instead of using architectural style, you could
of the
say,
county.
a review of the architecture, or actually take out architectural, go elevations, or something along those
Mhm.
lines.
Yeah.
That would give it to us.
we
Because
can-
basically, it's so that we can review
move on to telecommunication towers, Article 15, page 145. Now you've probably got more experience than the rest of us have on that. That is Stephen.
Yeah, I think the co-locations, we have an existing ordinance, the requirement that they offer the county a spot, you would say where on the tower. As we move forward, we currently only have 2 towers that have been approved since that ordinance came in. But if there are others, is that something we can include? Do we include that in this current draft?
Will you remind me, what the issue is, we do have a couple more towers coming up. And we had in our ordinance that, they had to give the county a certain deal. Well, we weren't clear enough, because what we needed to put in the space that we required them to give us, we couldn't put what we needed on it. Look at some language to make sure that somewhere on that tower, no matter what much space we need, they need to provide that. With that, did I get that?
Well, is the provision still in there, and is it adequate, which the current
Well,
one's not?
I
So,
checked before, and I do not believe it's adequate,
right.
because I think some issues had come up.
I didn't think so either. I didn't have anything firm to base it on, but I wanted to make sure that A, it was in there, and B, it was adequate, so.
For my own clarification, is that only for the much larger towers? Or is that for any?
Any tower.
Co-location?
Any tower.
We don't have co-locations on buildings, so. This would be the communication cell towers, so your
Okay.
standard lattice
Gotcha.
or monopole.
And specifically to make sure that if we needed to add them for 911 capabilities is what
And that was one of
space
the,
that
where
we
it
want
came
to
up.
make sure that we have the ability to use.
Can anybody tell me why we limit the height of the tower to 199 feet?
It requires a light after that.
Why can't we go ahead and put a light on?
Well,
Can, but neighbors usually complain.
Well, we also, when the ordinance was initially done, if you want a really, really high limit, you have a central garage, you can do that, but you can't use this ordinance, you're starting from scratch. For the ordinary one that most people want to put in, 199 plus the 4 feet.
Of the,
The antenna, FAA is happy, they're happy that they put more of them out there. So we were seeing a lot of potential for those, and the reason that came about, we actually had, before we had the ordinance, we had someone want to put a tower up on a big piece of property, within about 75 feet of several neighbors. And we had no ordinance, and it went round and round and round. After the ordinance, the next 2 applications we had, the applicant knew what to expect. They were happy with it, the neighbors were happy with it. And on one of them, people came, were asking how soon could the tower be put up for cell phone access. So they do a larger one, but they're starting from scratch. So this is just for the ones that most telecommunications folks want to put in.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, no other comments, moving on. We need to discuss solar facilities.
Mr. Chairman, if I may. This solar facility, it would probably be beneficial for the planning commission and myself that we not really discuss this right now, because while this is very close to what you're seeing in Sweet Sioux conditions, and many of those conditions, well, all those conditions are this, but I think we are going to need to add some of the language in the conditions if we keep solar. as I told you earlier, if there might be a decision to make whether you want to recommend to the Board of Supervisors to remove solar facilities from our ordinances. But failing that, if we decide to keep them in, I want to include some of those conditions and turn those, and make those a part of this ordinance. And it's kind of a lot of work.
I'm fully in agreement with keeping solar towers in the ordinance. And keeping it as a use in the county. I do think we need to.
I got some more stuff to put in there. And I'll bring that to, we can bring that to the.
We need to come up with some limitations on where there are some limitations in the amount.
That's a major amount of work.
We don't-
I think
We
can-
don't want to eat up the whole county. So,
And Mr. Chairman, if I may,
sure.
I would strongly recommend taking that out of the ordinance for now. The current one we have has been, you spent a lot of staff time on that, would that be a true statement?
I have spent a lot of time.
And if we leave it in the ordinance and Sweet Sue is approved in February or March, you're allowed to get a lot more applications in. That may be much closer than you would like to see, but once the applications are coming in with the existing ordinance, we're kind of stuck. And again, I've heard some of the supervisors talk about waiting until we've updated the comprehensive plan, and is solar something we want to see in our future? If it is, it's something we can bring back into the ordinance. But with controversy and the amount of staff time, and I just wonder if we can clean it up now, that's fine, but at what point would we be adding the additional?
Now,
Okay.
this isn't something I'm
Can
waiting. But I want this ordinance, our new ordinance, to reflect the conditions that we developed for Sweet Sue. Okay, we developed a good, what I feel are a really good set of conditions. This draft ordinance doesn't include some of those provisions that we have in the conditions, so that we should add, but I plan to do that like now. This is not something I'm waiting.
Can we enlist Berkeley Group to take that?
Oh, I have enlisted Berkeley Group to do that. Yeah, they've been involved in the solar ordinance since, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, so then at the Board of Supervisors meeting, and I was not at it, but it failed on a 2-2 vote.
Yes, sir.
And
Actually-
they deferred it so that it wouldn't be
It
killed.
tabled.
Yeah, they tabled it.
Tabled it.
So you're adding additional conditions beyond those?
No.
So what?
The Board of Supervisors didn't have a problem with the conditions at all. One member of the board wants to see a House bill for solar facilities that may allow the county to get more revenue. And another one of the supervisors was interested in having some additional engineered studies.
So this current draft does not match what the board saw, or it does? And what this planning commission saw in January?
No, the conditions, other than I changed 18 and 19 of the conditions, those have been consistent throughout. This draft ordinance, this ordinance doesn't include everything I have in those conditions. And I will incorporate that into this draft with some help. But yeah, that's the difference. The conditions that you have seen 3 times now, with some very minor changes, are really need to be incorporated into this draft. There's some things in those conditions that we should have in this draft. That's the only change.
But what we saw in January was not sufficient.
But not because of the conditions. It was because Travis Maskowski.
No, but the planning commission, if I may, Mr. Chairman, the planning commission had 3 votes for, 2 votes against.
Yes, sir.
And so the 2 votes that were against, obviously the existing ordinance as proposed in the January meeting.
They weren't against it.
Yeah, my understanding from Ms. Height and Mr. Wagner was it's not a problem with this ordinance or the conditions that we established. It was related to other things.
Well, one thing in particular, you were concerned about the slope
Concerned about the slope, the runoff,
and the distance from the wetlands.
wetlands at the lower slope, the streams.
Shouldn't those be incorporated in conditional use? No slope greater than whatever percent we recommend, whatever distance from the wetlands.
Well, we got to, we're required to have 100 feet from wetlands. That's already in the ordinance, not in this ordinance, but it's in our
Conditions.
conditions.
But that wasn't sufficient.
Not in the conditions, it's in the ordinance. In the Chesapeake Bay ordinance.
Yeah,
resource
protection
A lot of this is in the Chesapeake Bay ordinance already. So even the 25-foot slope, 25% slope, is in the Chesapeake Bay ordinance. So I think those conditions are pretty well taken care of.
But I mean, the slope for Sweet Sioux was, I thought, less than 25%, wasn't it?
Well, you.
It's impossible to tell at this
if you
point
look at-
because we don't
If
have.
you look at your
construction.
contours, it runs anywhere from 10% to well over 25%, depending on where you are on the slope.
And the distance to the wetland was
The distance
insufficient.
from the wetlands, from the way I look at the contour map, there's an issue with the distance from the
So
wetlands.
shouldn't that be added to the ordinance?
It's-
Because
It's in the Chesapeake Bay ordinance.
Because the concern I have, with Sweet Sioux in particular, I know it's been hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe
I don't
millions.
care.
Well, no, no. I do care. They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions of dollars, thinking that their project would be okay. We need to let developers know what the expectations are, because if we do not let them know in advance of the ordinance,
I don't agree with you. They know what the Chesapeake Bay ordinance says. They're well aware of it.
and they're
I would-
in compliance with
What I would
they
like to
can.
know, John, is what we're going to find out in the next phase. I would like to know that now. And we could have, the board, if they so chose, could require that. But right now, that's not in there.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, it is 9:17.
Yes, it is. You all wish to adjourn? And one thing we want to know is when the next session will be. Well, probably we don't have our calendars. If you want Krista to hold, find out when the agenda is for the next meeting, then you can do that. And then adjourn.
Spirited discussion. Thank you. It is because it matters.
Say that again.
I said it was a spirited discussion, which makes sense because it matters.
Well, I wouldn't trade the discussion tonight for anything, even though I recognize that Ms. Castanera is a little upset with us, but
That's all right.
that's the way things are.
That's all right.
With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Well,
I'm gonna
we didn't finish, but let's say we had